Ahead and get started. Is that a voice from above? Okay. Let me welcome everybody. Please take a seat. It's a great turnout. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dennis Braham. I'm chairman of the board of the Jewish Federation. I want to welcome you all here this evening. This is a very interesting juncture for our community to be able to share with all of you the results of this newly done demographic study. You're going to hear from Dr. Ira Schenken soon, who will be introduced by Joe Pryzant. It's interesting because it has been a long time since we've had a demographic study done in this city of our Jewish community. In fact, as I was walking in, I saw Vic Samuels, who chaired the 1986 study. So it indeed is a long time and a good time for us to see exactly where our community sits at this moment in time. I want to, in introducing this, and you're really not here to hear from me, just thank a few people. First of all, I want to acknowledge publicly, as I've done on other occasions as we presented this, Russ Robinson. Russ was the person who really envisioned that we needed the study and encouraged the Federation to get it going. And Russ was also the person who helped us raise the money to pay for the study, which was all paid for with private donations specifically for this project. In that regard, we had a number of community families, leadership families in our community who stepped forward to help underwrite the study. But the lead gift especially is worth mentioning because it was so generous, and that was from the Alexander family, from Joan and Stanford Alexander. So I specifically want to thank them for making that lead gift. Excuse me. I also want to publicly thank Joe Pryzant, who's sitting here, who you'll hear from in a minute. Joe was approached about chairing the committee that he put together to convene the study, to organize it, and to work with Ira Schenken. And we could not have had a better person chairing this committee. Joe, I thank you. As I've thanked you before, you brought real commitment to this, intellect, analytical thought, and a real caring for the community, so I want to thank you for that. As I said, the study was last done 30 years ago, so it is a completely fresh look at our community. And what you're going to see today is just a small sampling from the study. The study consists of more than 900 pages, hundreds upon hundreds of analytical slides. You'll only see a small selection of those tonight, and it is a snapshot. What's important about the study is not just what you take away in terms of introductory information today, but also that you understand that it is really done for the benefit of all of our constituencies in this community. It's done for the benefit not just of the Federation, but also for all of its beneficiary and non-beneficiary agencies and synagogues, educational facilities, and everybody that is active in our Jewish community. We want people to take the study, not let it gather dust on the shelf, but rather use it to slice it and dice it for strategic planning purposes that hopefully will be significant added value for our community. So think of it as a tool, not as an end result in itself. It's really just a new beginning for our community to look at things in a new, reflective, deliberate, strategic way. With that said, Joe, please come up here. Please welcome Joe Pryzant.
Thank you, Dennis. I also want to thank the Federation for giving me this opportunity to chair this committee. I think we did great work, and I think it will have an impact on the Jewish community for many years to come. It was a tremendous pleasure working with Lee and Barbara and Tiffany to organize this study. I also want to thank Emmanuel. Is Jason here for letting us use the facility and for setting everything up? The purpose of the study, as Dennis said, is to provide a planning tool for the disparate Jewish institutions in the greater Houston area. This includes the synagogues, the schools, the Federation, the Evelyn Rubinstein Jewish Community Center, the Jewish Family Service, 7 Acres, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But for this to be a useful planning tool, there had to be acceptance and buy-in from the entire community and confidence in the results. So to build confidence and buy-in, we formed a committee that represented, we hope, the many disparate institutions and factions and groups that comprise the Jewish community. We worked to gain great diversity, not only in geographic areas, but denominations, the level of observance, age, and even sexual orientation. We also wanted that the major institutions, 7 Acres, the Jewish Family Service, the Federation, the synagogues, et cetera, were represented in the process. So we formed the committee, and our task was to design the survey, or actually to modify the study that Dr. Sheskin has used in 45 other communities across the country, to modify that survey to meet the specific needs of the Houston Jewish community. Initially, the Federation contracted for 1,000 interviews, but after those 1,000 interviews were completed, it became clear that certain areas were under-surveyed. So he came back to the Federation and asked for additional funds to conduct another 200 surveys, mostly in outlying areas. So we'd have a statistically valid sample of the entire community. Finally, the raw data began to be transmitted this summer, and as Dennis said, the initial report has over 900 pages of data, as well as 700 slides. Now we are in the process of sharing this data with many, many different institutions and constituencies that we hope will use this data to plan their future. As Dennis also said, please keep in mind that this is a mere snapshot of the Jewish community in 2016. So much of the data may reflect what has been going on in this community in the last year or so, the economic downturn, perhaps, and the flood, et cetera. But also keep in mind that we are comparing 2016 to 1986. In 1986, as many of us remember, was a period of great economic turbulence in Houston, which may or may not have affected the results that we gained at that time. Dr. Sheskin will speak for more or less an hour, and then we're going to have some time for questions and answers after that. But I ask you to please hold your questions until the end. So often in these presentations, people ask questions, and the answer is, wait 5 more slides and you'll have your answer. So Dr. Sheskin's done this a few times, and he'll get to all your answers, all your questions. It is also my pleasure to introduce Ira, and in the field of Jewish demography, all roads lead to Dr. Ira Sheskin, who's a professor of geography at the University of Miami and the director of the Jewish Demography Project at the University of Miami. Ira is the expert in the field of Jewish demography in the United States. So not only will he tell us what this community looks like, he can compare the results in this community to 45 other communities he studied, as well as other communities that are already in the Jewish data bank. So Ira, the show is yours.
Yes? No, it's not. Yeah, now it is. And if we can cut the lights in the front of the room a little bit, that would be great. Good evening, everybody. The presentation will be at least an hour. If you fall asleep, that's okay. I just have one rule in my classes. I tell the students, if you fall asleep, it's fine. Just don't snore, because it's unfair to wake the person next to you. Okay? Anyway, oh, wow. Yeah, no, that's a little too loud. Okay, good. Let's begin. This study covers a large array of topics. It wasn't done just for the Federation. It was done for all the Federation agencies, the synagogues, and lots of other people out there. In the end, these data get put on at a website called jewishdatabank.org, as well as jewishhouston.org. Jewishdatabank.org gets tens of thousands of downloads of these reports from about 200 Jewish communities that have done these studies since sometime in the 1960s. These studies do not sit on shelves and not get used. They get used for hundreds and hundreds of purposes over the years. You can see the list of topics that we do, and I want to talk just a little bit about how this is done. You all know, since you've got this thing in front of you, that we came up with 26,000 Jewish households. There are approximately 16,000 Jewish households on the Federation's mailing list. That's a good source of calling 16 out of 26,000 households. The problem is, of course, is that there's another 10,000 households there who knoweth not the Federation. And you have to fairly sample those as well, or what you've done is to get a sample of known Jewish households. And clearly the known Jewish households are different from the ones who do not happen to be currently involved in the community. How do we do that? Well, we take the area code here, 713, and then we take 729, and we throw 4 random numbers at the end, like you might pick out numbers to buy a lottery ticket. We dial those numbers. Hello, I'm calling on behalf of a population study for the Jewish community, sponsored by the Jewish Federation of Greater Houston. We're not asking for donations or selling anything. We're interviewing households with 1 or more Jewish people. Was anyone in your household born or raised Jewish? Or was anyone currently Jewish? Now, you get some strange answers to that question. Okay? Like the woman who said, we have 50 women here, all married to the same Jew. We called a convent. Okay? Or another one where you call, and this was in Palm Beach County, and they answer the phone, suicide prevention hotline. Okay? Or the one where they say, you want to know if anyone here is Jewish? Yes. Do you know you called the city morgue? Okay. Then she said, would you like me to check the toe tags for you? I guess the religion must be on the toe tag. Okay. So here's the point. In order to find Jewish households, if you call 100 random phone numbers generated like that, maybe 30 ring in households. And here in Houston, for every 100 households we reached, 1.4 was Jewish. One of the lowest in the country. So we dialed hundreds of thousands of numbers, hundreds of thousands of times, in order to get a fair sampling of Jews that are not known to the community. We called landlines, we called cell phones. We even have a way today of finding people moved into Houston, let's say from New York, your cell phone only, and your only cell phone has a 212 area code. We can now get cell phone numbers by the billing zip code. So even if you keep your 212, right, area code, it's being billed to 77096, we can get that number and we can call a fair sampling of those folks. The survey itself was 22 minutes. Was anybody here a respondent? Thank you all very much for giving your time. So there's a main report, a summary report, and lots of slides, as both speakers so far said. We didn't get the front lights shut off yet. We'll get much better ability to read these if someone can hit the lights someplace. This is a chart here that compares as many as 55 Jewish communities around the country that have done studies in the past 20 years using basically the methodology that we used here. Okay? The Houston results will always be in red for 2016, and the 1986 results will be in blue. Okay? It's unimportant, actually, if you can read all of these community names here, because what I want you to see is Houston used to be low on this, now Houston is high on this, and that gives us a lot of good information. So let's start off with the Jewish population, the size of the Jewish population of Houston. We found 26,000 Jewish households, and in those 26,000 Jewish households are 63,700 people. Of those 63,700 people, 51,000 are Jewish. 12,700 are non-Jewish spouses and children not being raised as Jews. Okay? So if you ask me how many Jews live in Houston, the answer is 51,000. If you ask me what's the size of the population that the Jewish community wishes to serve, the answer is 63,000. Since we wish to serve everyone living in households with at least one self-identified Jew. There's the 1.4% who are Jewish. You notice if you go to South Palm Beach, which is Boca Raton, Delray Beach, every other phone number you dial at random is Jewish, including Jerry Seinfeld's mother, who happens to live there. Houston is the 32nd largest Jewish community in the United States with the 51,000. And here's what's happened since 1986. The number of households went from 16,000 up to 26,000, a 63% increase. The number of people living in these households went from 45,000 to 63,700. And the number of Jews went from 33,000 up to 51,000. Now, the going number for the Jews in Houston has always been 45,000. I'm the editor of the American Jewish Yearbook. I keep the official statistics for the Jewish Federations of North America. And since about the late 80s, the entry for Houston has always said 45,000. That's because of a misreading of the 1986 report. The number of people in Jewish households was 45,000. The number of Jews was 33,600. Okay? Now, obviously, over the years, it was increasing, and eventually 45,000 was closer to the truth than 33,000 was. Okay? Okay. We divided Houston into the geographic areas that you see. You have this on your handout, and you have this map on your handout, too, so I just want to point out one thing about this. Each dot represents 25 households, and keep in mind that the dots are randomly placed within each zip code. So it doesn't mean there are 25 Jewish households right there, right? There are 4 dots in here. It means there's approximately 100 Jewish households in this zip code, okay? Now you can see there is some concentration in these inner 3 areas here, Central City, Memorial, and Core. About 60% of Jewish households are here, but another 40% are spread around the metropolitan area. Now, using a methodology that we don't have time to talk about, we went back and looked at 2010 and compared it to 2016. There's been no change in the number of households in the core area. There's been a decrease in Memorial. And that's because, as you'll see, that's due to death more than anything else. Single elderly woman living alone dies, we lose a household. Central City has increased because of an influx of young professionals into this area. The suburban Southwest went from 2,300 households to 2,900. The West and the Southeast didn't change. The North grew. And all of Houston grew by about 1,600 households in the past 6 years. So there's the 60% that live in the 3 large areas, and then 40% live in the rest of the county. Of the county is fine. If we look at the top 3 zip code areas, 96, 479, and 401, 1 out of 4 Jewish households live in one of those 3 zip codes. However, I want you to think about, for example, Milwaukee, where if you take the top 3 zip codes there, you get 58% of households. It's a lot easier for, let's say, Jewish Family Service to serve a population that's located within a short distance. If 58% of your Jewish households live in one of 3 zip codes, when you run an activity like this, everybody lives closer to it, it's quite helpful to have everybody live in a quote-unquote Jewish neighborhood. Now, if you look here, 24%, you really don't have the advantage that a Milwaukee or a West Palm Beach or a Rochester or a Baltimore have. 25% of adults were born in Houston, 15% are foreign-born, 10% were born in other parts of Texas, 15% in New York. The percentage locally born went from 20 to 25%. When people are locally born, then chances are the synagogue they're joining is the synagogue that their parents and grandparents belong to. Places like Baltimore benefit by that. Places like Houston benefit much less. South Palm Beach is just an unusual place. Not one Jewish adult in South Palm Beach was born there. Foreign-born, 15%, hasn't changed all that much since 1986, but it's relatively high for a Jewish community. And you've got about 1,000 households from the former Soviet Union, 2,500 households who are, 2,500 adults who are Hispanic, 3,700 who are Israeli, 10% of households, that's 2,600 households, contain one or more member who's LGBT. And you can see that's one of the highest in the country, although I suspect, you see, the Broward study, that's where I live, that's Fort Lauderdale, is right up there with Houston. And I suspect that what's happened here is these studies all go back a decade. And I think what you're finding is more of a willingness to say yes to this question when the answer is yes, somebody in the household is LGBT. Home ownership is about 83%, up from 69% 30 years ago. This is how long do you live at your current address. That's not a terribly interesting slide. But I wanted you to see the categories. If we look at the next slide, I put Central City in red, because what this is telling me is that almost half the households in Central City are in their current home for less than 5 years. This growth has been recent then, right, is what it tells me. And that's why we ask this question. We don't ask this question for this pie chart. We ask it for this bar chart right here because it tells us which areas have been growing as well. We also ask people how long they're living in Greater Houston. And good news is 71% are here 20 years or more. These folks should feel attached to the place, okay? But we have 350 households moving in each year. Now we've got another question we asked is if people intend to move in the next 3 years. Not all that interesting by itself, but when you ask them, do you intend to move within Greater Houston or elsewhere in the United States, we find out that 9% have plans to leave Greater Houston in the next 3 years. Now that's a little toward the high side compared to about 35 other Jewish communities for which we have these data, and may be related to the flood. Okay? We don't know for sure because we did not ask that question. We have 3.4% who said, I'm definitely out of here within 3 years, and 5.6% probably leaving within 3 years. If you have 350 households moving in each year, and you have 300 definitely leaving each year, and 500 probably leaving each year, this is a total of 800 versus 350 moving in. It would tell me that I would be cautious about continuing to believe that because the population has been increasing, it's going to continue to increase. It would look like, for at least the next few years, there may very well be more households leaving Houston than coming in. There's another reason to believe that the Jewish population may not increase or may even show a little bit of a decline in the next few years, and that's the age distribution that I'm about to show you. There's definitely more Jews dying every year in Houston than being born, as you'll see in just a minute. What percentage of your adult children stay locally, right? They grow up, they get out of the house, they go away to law school, then they come back with their 2 big dogs. Don't get me started. Okay. About half of your kids stay locally, is what this slide is telling us. That's above average for a Jewish community. Let's look then next at demography. This is called a population pyramid. The boys are on the left and the girls are on the right. Now, what this tells us is that 1% of all Americans, both Jewish and non-Jewish, are female, age 85 and over. As another example, 3.3% are male, age 0 to 4. So this is a typical population pyramid for a developed country. Now take a look at Jews in Houston. All Americans, Jews in Houston. The difference you see is that for all Americans, the median age is 37, and for Jews in Houston, it's 50. For all Americans, 13% are age 65 and over, and for Jews in Houston, it's 25%. So this is an older population. These are the baby boomers right in here. And that's why this really sticks out, the 60 to 64s, the 65 to 69s, and the 70 to 74s. Here's what happened over time. The white bars here are 1986. The green bars are 2016. If we look at the children first, 11% decrease in children. The 18 to 34-year-old number really hardly changed. The 35 to 49 went down by 7%, not a big deal. But look what happened here. The number of 50 to 64-year-olds went from 5,000 to 16,000. The number of 65 to 74s went from 2,000 to 10,000. And the number of 75 and overs went from 1,000 to 6,000. Yeah, very, very big change. Now, if your 1986 study was 2006, that is 10 years ago, I would say either they made a mistake on the old study or I've made a mistake on this study. This type of change does not happen in 10 years. Many stayed and got older. Yes, it beats the alternative, okay, getting older. Yes. Right, and this is, look at the percentage increases that we get here. This is an enormous change and should change the way in which this community thinks about itself. If we just look at the kids, there's a 15% decrease in 0 to 5-year-olds and a 20% increase in 6 to 12s and a 27% decrease in 13 to 17s. We can translate everything into numbers. There are 16,000 elderly. I hate to call age 65 and over. Since June 10th of last year, 65 and over is no longer elderly. Okay? That's the Census Bureau definition, so I will use it. There are 10,000 children in Jewish households, of whom 7,800 are being raised Jewish or part Jewish. Back in 1986, 29% of the population was aged 0 to 17. Today it's 16%. You went from one of the youngest to one of the ones with the fewest children. Age 18 to 34 went from 24% down to 18%. 35 to 49 went from above average to below average. 50 to 64 went from 12%, the lowest in the country, up to 25%, the highest in the country. 65 and over went from the lowest in the country to above average. This is a sea change in what this Jewish community is. 75 and over went from the lowest in the country to average. The median age went from 32 to 50. By geographic area, take a look right here. I'm not going to cover all of these. Memorial. Half the Jews in Memorial are age 67 and over, which means they're mostly elderly women living alone, which means that every time one of those dies, we lose a household. Remember I showed you there was a decrease in Jewish households in Memorial? That's what that is. The increase in the central city, I can tell you right here. Look at the 18 to 34-year-olds. We found the same thing in Miami. We found the same thing in Fort Lauderdale. And the reason I'm using those as examples is not just because I work in Miami and I live in Fort Lauderdale. Those are the two most recent studies out there. Young millennials today are moving downtown in Miami, in Houston, and in Fort Lauderdale. Suburban Southwest is also an older region. The West has lots of 50 to 64-year-olds. Southeast is older as well. Half of the children live in the core area. That's somewhat good news. It makes it a little easier to serve the kids You know where to put your day schools, et cetera. You're certainly not going to put one in the southeast. You're going to put them in the core area. Where do the older adults live? Much more spread out. Fortunately, the older adults, as you'll see later, are healthy and wealthy, okay? And aren't going to need as many services as if they were less healthy, as is the case, for example, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and not at all wealthy, as is the case in New York, for example. Average household size came down significantly. One-person households went up a little bit. And let's take a look at household structure. The most common two household structures here are a married couple with children at home. That's 1 out of 5. And an elderly married couple with no children at home. That's also 1 out of 5 households. But much Jewish community planning is done around the fact, well, there's a mother, a father, and a couple kids. That's only 1 out of 5 households in the Jewish community. And we can translate things into number of households. For example, there's 1,000 single female households, age 75 and over. There's 5,900 single-person households, right? So you have a single person living alone. If they have financial difficulties or health difficulties, they need help before someone who's in a married situation might need help. The households with children went from 39% of the community down to 22%. What percentage of children have 2 full-time working parents? 41%. Go home and both mom and dad are at work. This is for children age 0 to 12. Let me see if we can get some guesses on this. If you took 100 children at random in the Jewish community, what percentage, how many of those 100 go home and there's just mom or just dad? Anybody want to give me a guess? 50. 12. Okay, now you all know why we do these studies. Did I change the slide? Yeah, 4%. And now it's 33% for all Americans, both Jewish and non-Jewish. 33, that's at the bottom here, 34, okay? And Houston, most Jewish communities are in the 7 or 8 range. Houston happens to be somewhat lower on this, but yeah. When people tell me, oh, we don't need to do a study, we know what's out there. No, we don't. I sat one night, I've been on 2 synagogue boards. You don't want me on your synagogue board because both synagogues went out of business that I was on, okay? But, and they're sitting there talking about increasing membership by giving special rates for single-parent families. And there may be a good reason to do that, but there aren't very many single-parent families out there. What percentage of children live in a household which an adult is or was divorced? That's about 1 out of 5. So 1 out of 5 children often have half-brothers, half-sisters, a current father, a previous father, those types of issues that they're dealing with. What percentage of elderly live alone? That was 34%, now it's 17%. Good news. The fewer elderly living alone, the less help they're going to need as they age, if they're in a married couple. So having fewer elderly living alone is better for the community. Marital status. 1 in 5 adults have been through a divorce. 66% are currently married. The divorce rate is 105 divorced adults per 1,000 married adults. That's the way you do divorce rates. So if there's 1,000, for every 1,000 Jews who are married, there are about 100 who are divorced. That's half the national rate for all Americans, but it's well above the 58 from 30 years ago. This is an incredibly well-educated Jewish community. 79% have a 4-year college degree, compared to 29% of all Americans. But even among Jewish communities, look at where you stand compared to the others. Graduate degree is 39% compared to 11% of all Americans. 4 out of 10 Jewish adults in this community have a graduate degree. I should tell you one other thing about marital status that's not from your study, but I like telling all audiences this. In Broward County, and the results are similar for Miami, where we have studies done in Miami from 1994 to 2004 to 2014. They do it every 10 years. Think about that age group, 18 to 34 years old. 20 years ago, 40% of those folks were married. Today, 14% are married. From 40 to 14. We can't do it here because the 1986 data set doesn't allow us to do that analysis. Think about the difference. That means that people are getting married much later, they're having their kids much later, and they're joining synagogues much later, aren't they? Okay? Let me move this forward. 51% are employed full-time and 20% are retired. The percentage employed full-time, think about what happened to the age, is way down. The percentage retired is way up. This is what you would expect given that change in the age distribution. But this is really fascinating because 1 out of 4 persons aged 65 and over is still working full-time. Now again, I can't go back to 1986, but I can tell you for Broward County, 20 years ago, 8% of elderly were working full-time, and today it's 24%, way up. So what's happening is the baby boomers like me aren't retiring as quickly as was the case decades ago. 9% are of relatively low income. They make under $25,000 a year, and 57% earn $100,000 and over. The median income then is $121,000 compared to $93,000 30 years ago. Now, of course, to compare over 30 years, I have to adjust for inflation. That's been done. And it's been done for all the communities because these studies have been done over about a 20-year period. So Houston has very high incomes, much higher than 30 years ago, and the 121 compares to 56,500 for all Americans. This is a wealthy Jewish community. Here it is for households with children. The median income for households with children is $162 compared to $106,000 30 years ago. Very high now. For persons aged 65 and over, the median income is $104,000. That's up from $75,000 30 years ago and is one of the highest in the country. That's why I said, yes, you've had an increase in elderly, but they have the money to pay for the services. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some poor elderly out there. There clearly are, and when they need our help, we should clearly provide it. But overall, to have a median income of $104,000 among those aged 65 and over is pretty remarkable. Median household income, we'll cover just a few of these. In the central city is $160,000. Look at the difference between 65 to 74-year-olds, $120,000, and 75 and over, $84,000. Look at the difference between elderly couples, where the median is $134,000, and elderly singles, where it's $39,000. Maybe cuts in rates should happen at the age of 75, and maybe elderly singles should be charged less for things than elderly couples. Synagogue members make about $9,000 a year more than non-members. So if anybody is trying to recruit for this synagogue, a great idea is to tell people that if they join the synagogue, their income goes up by $9,000, okay? Until the building fund chairman gets to them, right? Okay. 3.9% of Jewish households in Houston live below the federal poverty line, generally around $12,000 a year. Next, let's go to Jewish identification. We asked the respondents if they consider themselves Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, or just Jewish. And understand this may or may not reflect synagogue membership. I'm sure that some people tell us they're Reform and belong to a conservative synagogue and vice versa. We have people who tell us they're Orthodox and they don't keep kosher. We have people, older women, who tell us they're Orthodox because the shul their husband didn't used to go to was Orthodox, okay? So this is more a matter of a philosophical statement than it is a matter of their behavior, okay? Now, let's compare 1986 with 2016. So the percentage Orthodox really didn't change. Went from 5% to 4%. statistical margin of error here, right? It's within it. You say, but gee, doesn't it seem like there are more Orthodox around? Well, yeah, there are. That's why you have to think these things through. Those are percentages. 4% of 26,000 households is a bigger number than 5% of 16,000 households, right? From 30 years ago. That's number one. Number two, if you looked at the Orthodox in 1986, a lot of them were elderly women living alone with a household size of one, whereas the Orthodox today are younger couples with a significant number of children, right? So yes, there are more Orthodox. And there's lots of participation in Orthodox institutions, but that doesn't mean that the people who participate in Orthodox institutions necessarily are going to answer Orthodox when they answer this question. The percentage conservative went down by 5 percentage points, and Reform went down by 10 percentage points, and just Jewish went from 17% to 33%. That is consistent with what is happening in this country. For both all Americans and Jews, when asked, what is your religion, if any? Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, or something else? 22% will claim to not have a religion, both Jews and non-Jews. Now, we know that they're Jewish because when they give us answers like, well, I'm an atheist, I'm an agnostic, I don't know what religion I am, nothing in particular, and you ask them if they consider themselves Jewish for any reason, they say yes. These are people who they'll consider themselves ethnically Jewish or secularly Jewish or culturally Jewish, but they don't believe in Judaism. So they'll answer the religion question with, I'm nothing, but when asked if they're Jewish for any other reason, we'll say yes. That's 22% of Jews. And that's a big increase in the past 30 years, and we see that here in Houston as well. Orthodox is about average. Conservative is down below average now. Reform was well above average. It's now average. Just Jewish was quite low. It's now about average. By geographic area, I'll just give you a second to look at your favorite geographic area, and we'll move on because we can't cover it all. Do note the high just Jewish here in the southeast, the high Reform in Memorial, and Orthodox reaches its heights in the core area, but that's at 8%. Here it is by age. Notice the gray bars, which is the just Jewish, is at its highest for the under 35. But that's only because the millennials don't like labels. They don't like to tell us they're Democrat or Republican. They don't like to tell us whether they're conservative or liberal. And they don't like labels like Orthodox and conservative and Reform. So they pick out something. They say something else. Like, I'm just Jewish. Okay? Doesn't mean that they're not behaving in a Jewish way. In fact, you've got a good, strong under 35 group in this community. So who are these folks who go to Chabad? Only 14% call themselves Orthodox, 39% conservative, 28% Reform, and 19% are just Jewish. Okay, attitudes toward being Jewish. I think most of you probably know that the Pew Research Center put out a survey in 2013 called The Portrait of Jewish Americans. We have a lot to thank them for. It was a well-done survey. They spent $2 million that the Jewish community did not have to spend and did an excellent job. Okay? They asked several questions that we wanted to compare Houston on. One of the questions was, I'm proud to be Jewish. 94% of the Pew respondents said yes to that, and 97% here in Houston did. And the other one we're comparing here is, I have a strong sense of belonging to the Jewish people. 83% of Jews in Houston said that, versus 75% nationwide. We also asked people, is being Jewish mainly a matter of religion, ancestry, or culture? Now, people insisted that they wanted to say ancestry and culture, or religion and ancestry, or religion and culture. Some people said, hey, it's all three, I can't choose. So we allowed all those different answers, but only maybe 1 out of 5, this is here in Houston, said it's just religion, and that's all it is. That's 1 out of 5, okay? Everybody else sees, the culture and the ancestry here don't think it's mainly a religion. And then you have people who see it in a variety of different ways. For Passover, Seder, Hanukkah candles, Sabbath candles, and Christmas tree, we asked people always, usually, sometimes, and never. Passover Seder is average. Hanukkah candles is below average. Sabbath candles is average. You've got the second highest rate of having a Christmas tree in the country. Mezuzah on the front door at 63% is about average. Kosher home is 12%. Kosher in and out of the home is 6%. Refrain from electrical use on the Sabbath is 3%. All of these are average. Now, unfortunately, in 1986, the researcher did not use the standard set of questions. So we can only make a couple of comparisons to 1986. Having a mezuzah is up slightly, and always, usually, or sometimes lighting Hanukkah candles went from 79% to 87%. But I can tell you from all the recent data sets, the sky is not falling in on the Jewish community. When we look at home religious practices like Seder and Hanukkah candles and mezuzah, they all are showing either maintaining themselves over the years or actually showing a slight increase in participation. The Passover Seder, as I said, is average. And here's the Christmas tree, topped by Portland, Maine. About 1 out of 3 Jewish households here always, usually, or sometimes have a Christmas tree. Now, if we look by age, mezuzah on the front door is a little bit lower among those under 50, but Passover Seder is higher for younger people. So is Hanukkah candles. So is Sabbath candles. Kosher home reaches 1 out of 4 of the under 35s. Kosher in and out of the home. Christmas tree. Okay? So it's not like the young people aren't doing these things. In fact, the younger people are doing these things more frequently than the older people are. By type of marriage, okay, the green bars, both spouses were born Jewish. The light green bars, one is a Jew by choice, and the gray bars are intermarried couples. And you see the pattern here. When the conversion takes place, the couples are doing what in-married couples do where both were born Jewish. Okay? The light green and the dark green are always basically about the same length, except for kosher in the home. Notice that, for example, for Passover Seder, only about half of intermarried couples always or usually go to a Passover Seder. Now, you can look at that one of two ways. You can say, oh, gee, why isn't it, like the 92% for everybody else? Or you could say, isn't it wonderful that half of intermarried couples are going to Passover Seders? Okay? Well, that's, half full or half empty. Synagogue attendance, 1 out of 4 never go unless you invite them to a wedding or a bar mitzvah. 1 out of 4 go once a month or more. Both of these are about average. Here's once a month or more. Here's never. So there's nothing unusual about this. What is fascinating is look at synagogue attendance by age. The group most likely to go once a month or more are the under 35s. The group least likely to never go are the under 35s. And it's not like it's only older people going. Now, keep in mind, if you go to services, okay, you see a lot of older people there, more older people than young people, but that's because you have more older people than young people. As a percentage, the young people are just irreligious as the old people. Okay? Once a month or more, this compares under 35 with a whole bunch of other communities. Houston is quite high on this. That's why I say you have a pretty strong under 35 group. I'm wondering if it's birthright. Okay, types of marriage. If you take 100 married couples in this community, half, both spouses were born Jewish. For 10%, one spouse is born Jewish, the other is a Jew by choice. It's an in-marriage, right, but it's a conversionary in-marriage. And in about 4 out of 10 couples, one spouse is Jewish and the other one is not. So your couples intermarriage rate is 39%. Okay? Now, among synagogue members, 12% are intermarried. Among non-members, it's 63%. And since it's mostly married couples who join, I think if you're trying to expand your membership, keep in mind that 2 out of 3, right, married couples that you're trying to recruit are going to be intermarried couples. Intermarriage went from 30% of couples up to 39%, so a little above average on this compared to other communities. It's lower for the under 35s than for the 35 to 49s, and then gets lower again as age increases. This, again, is a relatively strong group, Jewishly. The under 35 group, you have one of the lowest intermarriage rates for that group. For the 35 to 49, that intermarriage rate doubled in 30 years. For the 50 to 64, we can't compare to 1986. That's relatively high. The 65 to 74s is average, and the 75 and overs is above average. 65 and over is average. Okay, here's the percentage of intermarried households. You can see in the outer areas, it's much higher than in the inner areas. Much higher for the just Jewish, goes down, conservative down, or Reform down to conservative, down to Orthodox. 45% of households with children contain an intermarried couple. Among synagogue members, it's 12%. If you went to day school as a child, it's 15%. We don't have time to go through all of these. I want to show you the level of detail of analysis that you have, and it'll all be online and can all be downloaded in PDF. If you donate to Federation, the intermarriage rate is 10%. If you don't, it's 63%. Now, take a look here and tell me what the intermarriage rate is. Abraham marries Sarah, right? And Howard Wolowitz marries Bernadette Rostenkowski. Those of you who are laughing, I know what your television habits are, okay? Good. What's the intermarriage rate? 50%. Yeah, that's the way we've done it so far. There are, in this little country here, Jewlandia, there are only 4 people living in Jewlandia, right? There are 2 married couples. One of the 2 is an intermarriage, so it's 50%. That's equivalent to the 39% for Jews in Houston. But there's another way to calculate the intermarriage rate is on that chart. 3. How many of those 3 Jews are intermarried? 1. That's 33%, isn't it? So the couple's intermarriage rate is 50%. The individual intermarriage rate is 33%. In Houston, the couple's rate is 39%. The individual rate is 25%. But that's 25% of Jews who are married, right? Some Jews are not married, so we need to subtract them out. And what we find out is if I took 100 Jews at random, you folks are not a random sample of Houston Jews, right? Okay, because you're here tonight, it means you're not a random sample. But if we took 100 Jews at random in this community, 15 of them would be married to a non-Jew. The rest would be married to Jews or simply not married. And the reason I go through this in this level of detail is because when I just used to present this 39% here, people went home and told their spouse, do you know that 39% of Jews in Houston are intermarried? No, they're not. It's 15. That's an enormous difference, isn't it? 32% of the children in intermarried couples are being raised as Jews, and 16% are being raised part Jewish. The 32% is quite low among other Jewish communities. 44% claim membership in a synagogue, 51% back 30 years ago. This is about average. But I can tell you from 30 other studies that somewhere between 80 and 90% of Jews in this community almost certainly join a synagogue at some point during their adult life. Only 44% are currently members. Under 35, high membership rate. 35 to 49, a little below average. 50 to 64 is way down. 65 to 74, 75 and over. 65 and over is down, and that's because something's happened in 30 years. 30 years ago, for that generation who was 65 and over, you're Jewish, you joined. Those days are gone. Households with children, about half currently belong. Intermarried households, only about 15% belong. And then we have the same data on belonging to synagogues, but take a look at this. Look what happens with length of residence. As people are here longer, right, they're more likely to join a synagogue. Okay? And just so you can see some of the level of detail, we don't have time to cover all of this. Now, we also asked every synagogue how many households they have in the synagogue. We added them all up, divided by 26,000. We didn't get the 44%, we got 37%. That's actually not so bad. Surveys like this always overestimate synagogue membership because synagogue members are simply more likely to stay on the telephone than non-members are. okay? So recognizing that, what I do is I always present what we believe is the truth, which is 37%. So we're 7 percentage points off in predicting synagogue membership. That's a pretty typical result. Now, from that synagogue survey, not from the telephone calls, of those households who are members of a synagogue, 19% are members of an Orthodox synagogue, 29% conservative, 50% Reform. You have 30 synagogues in town. Yeah. And in fact, it's up by 10 synagogues in the past 10 years. Like I said, sometimes we get discouraged because we see we have friends who are not behaving the way we think Jews ought to behave, et cetera, et cetera. You know what? The news isn't so bad. You added 10 synagogues in 10 years. That's a synagogue a year. Number of synagogue members went from 8,600 to 9,600 during this period of time. Notice where the growth is. No growth in conservative, no change in Reform. You've increased what I called Orthodox General and Orthodox Chabad. That's where the increase is of 1,000. It's really here. Percentage Orthodox is high compared to other communities. Percentage Conservative is quite low compared to other communities. Percentage Reform is above average. JCC, 19% claim membership. That's down. Households with children, 24% claim membership. Intermarried households, 8% belong to the JCC. But 42% participate in some JCC program in the past year. That's much higher than the membership rate, which was 19%. I'm going to skip over some things in the interest of time. About 1 in 4 households belong to some Jewish organization like B'nai B'rith, Hadassah, ADL, etc. These, we don't have a comparison with Houston 30 years ago, but I can tell you from most of the recent studies, the participation in specific purpose Jewish organizations like AIPAC and ADL and AJC is down all over the country. I'm going to skip that. I want to cover this one right here. I'm assuming, first, that the 44% who are synagogue members step foot in the synagogue that they're paying for at least once this past year. Seems reasonable. We then asked all the non-members, did they participate in or attend anything held at a local synagogue? And when we added them in, 2/3 of the Jewish community does go to a synagogue for something on an annual basis. Could be a service, it could be a speaker, whatever it is, right? It's 2/3. I don't have comparisons on that because it's a new question. But I've felt that synagogues were being undersold in the sense that if you just look at the membership rate, you don't see the impact of synagogues in the Jewish community. You need to look at the participation rate too. Synagogue membership is down and JCC membership is down since 1986. Okay. Jewish education of adults when they were children. 78% of adults had some Jewish education as a child. 17% in the day school, which is down from 1986, but still a pretty impressive number. Notice that younger people, both males and females, are more likely to have had a day school education as a child than older people are. For the 75 and overs, males are 13, females are 7. For the under 35s, it's 40 and 38. And if you send your kid to day school, right, when they grow up, they're more likely to be involved in the Jewish community. Take, for example, synagogue membership. If you went to day school, as a child, 59% are now synagogue members. If you went to a supplemental school, Hebrew school, religious school, 51%. If you had no Jewish education, only 20%, 29% are members now. Went to a Jewish overnight camp as a child. Look at the attendance at overnight camp is up for the lower age groups. And this shows us that those who went to an overnight camp, for example, if you went to a Jewish overnight camp as a kid, 83% are doing a Seder. If you didn't, did 69%. These slides, when I first created them for my study in Atlanta in 1997, we used as part of the justification to get donations for the Foundation for Jewish Camp, which is now sending thousands of Jewish kids to Jewish camp every summer who otherwise couldn't afford it. Again, these studies pay off. Okay? Adult Jewish education now. Did you attend any organized adult Jewish education program or class in the past year? Notice across all the age groups, people are doing this. And women are doing it more than men. This is a formal class type of thing. But what's more amazing is, did you engage in any other type of Jewish study, like on your own, with a rabbi, on the internet, with friends? Look at the percentages doing that. It's like 35%. It's not a formal thing, but they are doing their own Jewish education, even though they may not be walking into a synagogue and taking adult ed. And visited a Jewish museum or attended a Jewish cultural event in the past year is what, about 57, 58%. Do a Jewish cultural thing each year. I know in Broward County, we had they estimated 150,000 people show up for Israel Independence Day. We have a Jewish music festival now, a Jewish film festival. We have Jewish Book Month. All these things are drawing tens of thousands of people who may not be showing up in synagogues but are interested in Jewish cultural types of things. Preschool, of the children in preschool, 63% are in a Jewish preschool. So this community is doing about average. There are 1,000 Jewish kids going to preschool here. The community is doing average in getting Jewish kids into Jewish preschool. We surveyed the preschools. As I said, there are about 1,000 kids. For day school, 24% of the 5 to 12-year-olds are in day school. That's about average. And of the people in private school, including non-Jewish private school and Jewish day school, about 62% of parents paying for school are paying for a Jewish private school. That 62% is maybe a little below average among Jewish communities. If you're in Middlesex County, New Jersey, Monmouth County, New Jersey, or Bergen, New Jersey, if you send your kid to private school, it's Jewish. Very, very high. In places like Westport and Charlotte and Tidewater, more kids are being sent to non-Jewish private than to Jewish day school. You're at 62% of those going to a private school are in a Jewish private school. Again, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over some of this. I want to skip to this slide right here. Look at the 13 to 17-year-olds. Now, I think we would all agree that if your child is now 14 years old and you haven't given them any Jewish education yet, chances are they're not getting any, right? Okay. So let's take a look at the 13 to 17-year-olds. 33% went to day school, at least for a year. We don't know how long. 40% went to a supplemental school, and 27% never went at all. So those 7,800 kids being raised as Jews, right, 23% of them, 27% of them, parents said, I'm raising my child as Jewish, but then they never sent it for any Jewish education. That 73% who do get some Jewish education is rather low. That's something that we should be concerned about. We also looked at day camps. 59% of kids went to a Jewish day camp this past year. 75% went to a Jewish overnight camp. Excuse me, let me back up. I'm rushing and missing it. This is the market share again. So 6 out of 10 kids who went to camp went to a Jewish camp. For overnight camp, 3/4 of those who went to an overnight camp this past summer went to a Jewish overnight camp. That's a very good market share. So this community is effective at getting Jewish kids to go to Jewish overnight camp. We also asked about certain health limitations. About 16% of Jewish households in Houston, one or more member has some type of health limitation that limits their daily activities. For elderly single households, it's 31%, about a third. Under social service needs, let me just cover one of these so you get the idea. About 17% said that in the past year they needed marital, personal, or family counseling. Then we asked them, okay, did you receive the counseling? And this distance right here are the people who needed it but didn't get it. Then if they got the counseling, we said, did you get it through the Jewish community? This is the percentage that got it through the Jewish community. This is the percentage here that got it outside the Jewish community. So on this we see most of the need was met, but most of the need was met outside the Jewish community. And you can see the various issues that we asked about here, including special needs for children, for example. So marital, personal, and family counseling, that 16.8% is actually rather high among Jewish communities. We also asked about several elderly services, in-home health care and senior transportation being the biggest needs. In-home health care here, the need is about average. And I'm going to move this along a little bit now. For households who are age 75 and over, 73% have a local adult child. That is excellent news, because this is the group that most likely is going to have the most serious health problems. And the fact that large percentages have an elderly child there, have a child in Houston, is good. Now, in Broward, where I live, this 73 is only 28%. But that's not because the kids moved away. It's because the parents moved away from the kids up north, right? Israel, Lee's favorite topic that he always says, get to the Israel stuff. So, Lee, I'm there. 31% went on a trip to Israel with a Jewish group, Federation mission, synagogue trip, whatever. 28% went on what I call a general trip. They went on their own, travel agent, whatever it was. And 41% of households, no one's been to Israel. Now, the 59% who've been to Israel is one of the higher numbers in the country. The national number for this is 43%. That comes out of that Pew study that I mentioned before. You're at 59, that's very good. The 31% who've been on a Jewish trip to Israel leads the nation. So this community apparently is good at getting people to go on these types of missions. And going to Israel correlates very nicely with Jewish behaviors. Let's take in married here. Those who've been on a Jewish trip, 87% are in married. On a general trip, 66% are in married. And if you haven't been to Israel, 34% are in married. Now, of course, it could also be that those who are in married are more likely to go to Israel, right? So there's a chicken and egg here thing, and we're not implying causation, right? It isn't like, okay, I went to Israel, so now I'm only going to marry a Jew. Well, that could be, okay? But it is nice to know that the correlation is there, isn't it? Okay? Children to Israel is a little less rosy. Only 12% of your households with children have sent one or more of those children to Israel. That's up since 1986. But in Miami, 46% of the households with children have had at least one of those children go to Israel. And, you know, even if you could get this 12% up a bit, when these kids come back, they infect the other kids. And that can have a very important impact. 25% of the households who have not yet sent a child to Israel said cost was an important factor in why they did not send their child. About half are extremely or very attached to Israel. That half is about average among other Jewish communities. Big debate in the academic world over whether younger people are less attached to Israel than older people. I could give you an entire lecture on that. I have a slide set with about 100 slides on that issue. All I can tell you is in Houston, we don't see that. The younger people, look, 56% are extremely or very attached to Israel. It's 54% for the 65 and over. So the younger people are not less attached to Israel in this community. Same thing's true in Miami, by the way. Anti-Semitism. 15% of our respondents said they experienced anti-Semitism in Greater Houston in the past year. For households with children, this is a kind of disturbing one. 28% of your kids experienced anti-Semitism in the past year. Not only experienced it, but told their parents about it. Others may have experienced it and not told their parents, because we weren't interviewing the kids, we were interviewing the parents. 28%, as you can see, is a high number. In York, Pennsylvania, when we got that result, they took that result to the local school board and introduced a tolerance program that at the time the Anti-Defamation League was giving to school districts, and got it accepted as a unit in the 5th grade or something, based on these results. 5% of our respondents think there's a great deal of anti-Semitism in Houston, and 38% think there's a moderate amount. The 43% with a great deal or a moderate amount, it's about average. Look at what happens by age. The personally experienced anti-Semitism goes up for the younger groups. The perception that anti-Semitism is out there is higher for the older groups. The younger groups are generally living and working in a more mixed environment than the older groups are. They have many more non-Jewish friends. They're interacting much more with the non-Jewish community, perhaps, than the 65 and overs are. This is even more critical in Florida, because in Florida, most of our elderly live in elderly condominiums where even the non-Jews are Jewish. Jewish Federation donations, 39% claim to have donated. It should only be that high. I don't even want to tell you what the truth is, okay? I mean, so we ask things like, you know, in the past year, did your household make a donation to the Jewish Federation of Greater Houston? So it wasn't the past year. So it was 2 years ago. So it was 1967. They still say yes. Or they've been on the phone now but for 15 or 20 minutes, right? And now they think to themselves, aha, here comes the ask. Everything else was a setup for them to ask me for a donation, so they say they already gave. Also, like I remember interviewing a woman in Miami. She said yes to this. Very nice woman, very nice woman. She wasn't lying. She said yes. About 2 minutes later, she says, go back to that organization that began with an F. Said, the Federation. She said, yeah. My daughter came home from kindergarten at the synagogue, and we bought a tree in Israel. Is that the Federation? I said, no, that's almost certainly the Jewish National Fund. She said, go back and change my answer to a no. Now, not all respondents are going to be that, you know, diligent about their answers. But that's a lot of it, too. They're not necessarily lying. It's that they don't understand the structure of the Jewish community. People confuse JCCs with federations all over the country. They overpay for something at the JCC knowing that part of it is a donation. They think they gave to Federation. Okay? Anyway, that's 39%. Half the community wasn't asked for a donation. The donation rate is down since 1986. Not being asked to donate is up since 1986. 40% of the community is not on the mailing list. That's something I've been talking to Suzanne about, some methods to improve this figure right here. You go to Detroit, they've got 80% of the community on the mailing list. Again, we're going to skip some things. If you look at the donors, 40% are age 65 and over. For the donors of $500 or over, 44% are age 65 and over. Okay? You're going to skip over this, and you're going to skip over that. And let's just take a look at our political profile, because we're at about an hour now, actually, not so bad. Okay? Told you I could get through 250 slides if I skip by some. Okay? We asked people if they consider themselves to be Republican, Democrat, or an independent. And then they could say some other things, and we got some strange answers. Right? 31% Republican, 41% Democrat. So the first thing that you ask is, how does this look by age? And if you take a look, the Democrats are in blue, right? And you can see that's a little higher for the two older groups and lower for the three younger groups. Republican, 36, 25, 35, 28, 31. This is one of the few communities where I see some evidence of younger Jews being more Republican. I haven't seen that anywhere else. And in fact, in the Pew study I've been talking about, the group least likely to be Republicans are their 18 to 29-year-old group. They didn't use the same age groups as I used here. The least likely to be Republicans. Percentage Republican compared to other Jewish communities where we have these data is the highest by far. Now, Harris County itself is, votes Democratic most of the time, right? But Texas itself is a Republican atmosphere. Is that reasonable to say? Okay. Well, it's the difference in Florida between living in Miami, Broward, and Palm Beach County, which went like 75 or 80% for Hillary, and living in the northern part of the state where, it was the reverse. Miami is the only place in the country where we look north to find the South. Okay? Anyway, this is by far the highest, and geographers and sociologists have been doing work on something we call community context. How does the milieu in which you live impact the way in which you think? And Jews continue to be Democrats even as their incomes get higher, right, for the most part. And because they live in mostly areas where most of the people are Democrats. New York, California, right? Okay. Well, here in Texas, right, as a whole, right, the state is Republican, and that's probably one of the reasons we see Houston being so high, and Houston is quite low over here on this. And of course, the next question that we can ask, and I'm going to answer this from the Pew study, is I've had this discussion with Sid Dinerstein, who's head of the Republican Party in Palm Beach County. He keeps on trying to tell me that more Jews are becoming Republican over time. And what we see is, because we have a national Jewish population survey in the year 2000, and then we have the Pew study in the year 2013. The percentage Democrat and percentage Republican changed by 1 or 2 percentage points in the opposite direction that Sid would want them to, okay? But I wouldn't make any big deal of a 1 or 2 percentage points because we call that within the margin of error. So basically, there's been no change nationally in Democrat-Republican in the past 13 years or so, okay? So what we've done now is to show you, well, we probably skipped about 30 slides. So we showed you about 200 slides. There are at least another 800 slides, another 600 slides that I haven't shown you. And every one was put together because there are reasons why somebody in this community needs that information. Okay? So let's stop there and let's take some questions. Stand up, please. Oh, in the okay. There is a statement in the handout about the number of households that were impacted, right? I don't have a slide on that tonight. I don't know why I didn't make a slide on that. I got to make some slides on that and put them in the slide set. But within the handout, there's a statement here on the bottom. Did anybody find it? Bottom of page 3, thank you. That says, respondents in Jewish households in Houston were asked how much physical damage their residents suffered as a result of the Memorial Day flood. None, some physical damage, major physical damage, or complete destruction. You have 1,500 households who had some damage, 675 households major damage, 80 households complete damage, and about 2,250 had their residents impacted by the flood. How many of them have, you know? We also have another question that's not in there. Did you move out of your home for more than a month as a result of the flood? And again, I don't have that with me tonight. Okay? Yeah?
What's the everything, all the information compared to other cities? Take it all, and just summarize what city is Houston most alike as a Jewish community?
He's asking, what city is Houston most like as a Jewish community? I don't think there's an answer to that question, okay? I really don't. It's like Miami in some ways. It's like New York in other ways. I really can't answer that question. I don't think there's an answer to it. We would love to, by the way, who have compared Houston with Dallas, right? Dallas's last study was in 1988, so it's impossible to make that comparison. But I don't think it's like some cities on some things and others on others, and that's why we have all those charts so you can look at them and you can get to your question that way. Yes? Why don't you use the mic, particularly since you're sitting next to it?
The Republican number leaps off the page. Is there any correlation between your political affiliation, say synagogue membership, donations, and because that number is so high, is there any difference between Jewish Republicans in Houston and, say, in Miami? Do they behave differently?
Okay. If we want, I can bring up the entire 25 slides on Democrat-Republican and answer that question better. The one thing that I do have memorized from that is that the level of emotional attachment to Israel is higher among Jewish Republicans than it is among Jewish Democrats, okay? In the report itself, you have a profile of Jewish Republicans and a profile of Jewish Democrats that goes on for about 6 pages. So you can compare the two. And I have the slides to do that, and if you want to, you can take a quick look at them afterwards. But, that's among the 600 slides I didn't show you. It's all there, okay? That's a good question. Well, we only have Republican and Democrat for a limited number of cities. Because for years, the thinking was, look, federations who sponsor these studies are not political organizations. And so I was against putting them on, and so were most, putting them on the survey, and so were most demographic study committees. But I think we've come to realize that this really is part of understanding a community, right? The political orientation. And so I've been urging, I'm working on, right now on 5 of these. And the Republican-Democrat question will appear on all of those surveys. Everybody agrees that we should have it the same way 10 years ago we didn't ask LGBT, right, whose business was this, and now we're going to probably ask it on every survey that we do. Yeah? Yeah. Oh, we're past it. Hold on. It's at the bottom of one of these guys right here. There it is. HoustonJewish.org and JewishDataBank.org. The thing is that it's not there yet. Okay? Look, we have been, you know, we got off the phone July 17th. August, September, October, November. It's 4.5 months. And we have drafts of a 900-page report, 130-page report, 800 slides. And there's still some proofreading to be done before we're going to put it up on the internet and make it available. We suspect that will be sometime in January. Yeah?
You have certain parameters that you gave just to define who's acting Jewish. You have putting up mezuzahs and keeping kosher in the house, out of the house, etc. But setting those parameters, did you have a feeling for what factor was more contributory, day school or Jewish summer camp?
Oh. Interesting, yeah. What he's asking is in terms of keeping people Jewish, does day camp, this sleepaway camp, work better than day school or vice versa? For this community. You know, it's difficult to do that, and it's difficult to do that because you have to do it while doing things like controlling for age and sex of the respondent, and you have to look at people who didn't go to day school but went to overnight camp, or didn't go to overnight camp but went to day school. The sample size is likely to fail us. So I don't have an answer to that now. It's something that's doable. It's certainly doable with what I call my Decade 2000 data set, because what I did was to take the 23 studies that I did between 2000 and 2010, put them all in one data file. I've got 20,000 interviews in that data file. And I could do it with that, but it hasn't been done yet. Yeah?
So every time you put the slide, each one of us said, yes, that makes sense, or no, that's different than I would expect. There's an intuitive process that goes on each time. The one that struck me was the prevalence of Christmas trees. Can you talk to us about that? And I don't remember exactly, but it seemed dramatically higher than others.
Okay, give me just a second here. And let me pull up a slide. So here we are, a bunch of Jews in the synagogue talking about Christmas trees. This is the full set of slides, out of which I probably took about 30. Let's get to the Christmas tree. No, I want to get past that. Where's the one? Here it is. So this is why you have to drill down on this stuff, okay? One of the reasons you have so many Christmas trees is you have so many intermarried households. In intermarried households, 85% always, usually, or sometimes have a tree. In conversionary in married households, it's 15%. Now, those are clearly, although there's been a conversion, the person grew up with a tree, they want to have the tree. And in 9% of households in which both spouses were born Jewish, about 9% have a tree. Now, if you go to that 9% and you subtract out the Jews from the former Soviet Union, because they grew up with New Year's trees, right? That 9% probably goes down to about 7 or 8. So really, the point is that in households in which both spouses were born Jewish, you might be looking at 7% who always, usually, or sometimes have a tree. But overall, particularly because of the intermarriage, you've got 35% with the Christmas tree. And that really is pretty high. There's a 15-page section in the main report on Christmas trees. Yeah?
The Steinhardt Foundation did a monograph on the implications of the Pew study for Jewish philanthropists.
Okay.
Based on your experience and expertise, what do you think are the implications for us here in Houston of your study of the Houston community?
On philanthropy.
On Jewish philanthropy and Jewish organization. Back in a second, if you can tell us 2 or 3 respects in which the Houston community differed significantly from the overall American community as indicated by the Pew study.
This is an essay question in a multiple choice environment here. Well, first, look, one of the major problems we have with charitable giving is that we like more of it, okay? And there are lots of people who don't give a penny to Jewish charity every year. I mean, not a penny. We had that figure, not in this one. I skipped over it because of time, but if we go to the other one, let me quickly bring that up, where we were before. We hit end. Where's end on this keyboard? There it is. Okay. If we go back to one of the slides that I skipped, which is right here, 63% of the respondents gave something to a Jewish charity in the past year. That's right there. Either the Federation or some other Jewish charity. So 37% of this community does not take a nickel out of their pocket each year. If we could get those 37% to give at least something, right, that would change things in a significant way. Now, Houston has the same problem that's happening all over the country. Giving, particularly to federations, is down in a significant way. We are getting more money from fewer people in some communities, right? But giving is down. Giving is down to this federation. Giving is down to just about every federation in the country. A disproportionate share of the gifts are coming from people aged 65 and over. That's the main challenge. How do you make the Federation and other Jewish organizations relevant to the youngest groups? Some people think it's Jewish organizations that help both Jews and non-Jews. That's, again, something I didn't show you because we skipped. You see what happens when we skip? Jewish organizations that help both Jews and non-Jews, that only motivates 37% of people to make donations. That's higher among the younger people, though. I know in Miami, for, the earthquake in Haiti, right, the Federation collected money for that. The earthquake in Nepal, the Federation collected money for that. And they're trying to involve the younger people in that way. But really, the main challenge is what are we going to do philanthropically to get younger people more involved in supporting the community in a monetary sense? Now, do I have a choice of 1 out of 2 essay questions, or? Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to pivot on the issue of our aging population, and maybe some of the reasons for it. The question is, are we growing older here in Houston? Is our longevity improving in Houston? Are we having older people come to Houston to retire?
Okay, so the answer is, first, if we look at the people who moved into Houston in the past 5 years, 20% of them are now retired. So of those 350 households per year, right, what's 20%? About 60 come here to retire. This is not a retirement Jewish community. I have 200 buildings in Fort Lauderdale where 60 Jews a year come to retire, okay? So that's not it. It's clearly aging in place. Now, we also know that people are living longer. Life expectancy at the time of the American Revolution was 35. It's now 79. And if you're female, when you hit 65, on average, you're going to live another 20 years. It is still up since 1986. At the time that Social Security was passed in the 1930s, 32, okay, the average life expectancy in this country was 62. Now it's 79. So it has been steadily increasing. It's higher in Israel, by the way. Yeah.
Couple more questions. Two separate questions. Number one, what is the impact, if any, of the recent problems in the oil patch in the Jewish community, particularly on migration in and out of the eastern area of the Jewish people?
Okay, he's asked, yeah. Go ahead.
With the problems in recent polls, maybe because of the changes in the use of cell phones, et cetera, or people like me that usually answer phone calls from people that I don't know, how does that impact your study?
Okay, so the first question is, how is the oil industry impacting Jewish migration in and out? And my answer to that is, I don't live in Houston. I don't know, okay? I can tell you, as a geographer who's written quite a bit on migration, the major reason that people move from place to place is for jobs. So, okay. His second question has to do with the methodology. You know, and polls certainly took a hit in this last presidential election, but I don't think that much of what was said, I think, was unfair. You should know that the actual field work for this, the company that did the telephone calls, SSRS they're called, did the CBS News, New York Times polls during this previous election. Okay? So this was a top-notch company that did this. Now, yes, cell phones are more difficult, okay, because you're calling people and they're at a movie theater, right, et cetera, okay? But I would point out the following. The last set of polls before the election said Hillary would win the national popular vote by 3 percentage points. She won the national popular vote by 2 percentage points. That's certainly within the margin of error. Next, all the margins of error that are given, we're 95%, when we say it's plus or minus 3%, we're 95% certain that it really is plus or minus 3%. Okay? So out of 50, if you try to predict how the vote's going to go in 50 states, you will make 3 errors. And they did certainly make 3 errors, right? Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. So the polls, and surveys were never meant to distinguish between getting 49% of the vote and 51% of the vote. They're never going to be that accurate. Never. They were meant to tell us, is it 40% or is it 50%? Most of the problem with the polls was not the polls themselves, but the fact that the reporters on television want to tell you something that's new. So they'll say something like, you know, Hillary's lead has gone from 46 to 43 to 47, 44. That's no change. Both of those numbers are within the margin of error. If the lead is 3 percentage points, right, and there's a plus or minus 3.5% on the poll, it could be just the reverse of what the interpretation is being given by the press. So, by the way, I think on the whole, the press really tries to do a good job. They just haven't had my statistics course.
One more question.
Oh, I didn't answer that one, so go ahead, yeah. Well, I did kind of. Sure, yeah. We'll pick that up. You know, let me give you my little spiel on when you should answer surveys. First of all, we know of no instance where anybody has ever died because they told someone on the phone that they don't light Sabbath candles, okay? So, well, first of all, someone calls me, I answer all surveys simply because I want to see how dumb the questions are, okay? But that's because that's my area of expertise. But my rule is if someone calls me and wants to do a survey on, to get McDonald's to be able to sell more hamburgers, this is not worth my time. Well, you ask your questions, okay? Yeah, you have to pick up the phone. You have to listen to the questions. If they seem reasonable, right? We did send out 16,000 postcards or something like that, right? And flyers, and there was publicity about it as much as we could do. The point is, you know, I get a call from the University of Michigan Survey Research Center asking about cancer in my family. I'll spend an hour on the phone with those folks because there's an ultimate public good that comes out of it. This information will be so useful to the Jewish community for the next 10 years. Lots of decisions will be made better as a result of it. There's a real good reason for you to give 25 minutes of your time when you get a call like this, okay? So when you see a call and it's a survey, don't just say not interested and hang up. Find out who's doing it. Find out what the purpose is. If it's commercial purpose, you're under no responsibility to help somebody else make more money. If there's an ultimate public good, I would strongly recommend it's a good idea that everybody stay on the phone and do their public goodness. Thank you.